Welcome everybody. Welcome everybody. As you probably gathered, technical and highly questionable in terms of our questions. So please, if you have a smartphone, download Slido, open it, install it, add the event code of F8, and then you can ask questions. At the end, we'll be doing two types of questions because Slido is moving. I don't ever rely on Slido, and we have a lot of ask questions. With Slido, you actually get to vote on other people's questions, which is actually so you can see other people's questions. And say whether you like them, and then say whether you like them or not. Select questions. My name's Mark Hayden. I'm the executive director of MAPS Canada. And while I happen to be standing at the microphone, most of the work to make was done by an amazing group of people. I would like to thank first of all Anne Marie. Brains and the brawn behind what's happening here this evening. I'd also like to thank the Derek Kemp and Matthew Foglia for doing live streaming of this event, which is pretty cool. And Mark Heron for his media support. This is a fundraiser, and so it's already started. In fact, I would like to acknowledge Paul Kosulich, pull up your hand, Paul, who's already donated $1,000 to this event. So thank you, Paul. How many of you attended the Michael Pollan event a few days ago? Yes. I'd like to reflect. The moment for me that was the most stunning during that evening was when Santo Ono, the president of UBC, got up on the podium and said, "We need to take psychedelic research seriously." The poignant juxtaposition between that and my experience of trying to get UBC to take psychedelic medicine, research, healing seriously for the last 10 years. I felt like I had arrived. That was an amazing moment, and I just hope all of the staff of this beloved university heard what he said. I think that's going to open a lot of doors for us. But as you may be aware, psychedelic research is slowly becoming legitimized in the public discussion. I get about 100 emails a day for all kinds of different reasons on this topic, and the number of them that mention I've read Michael Pollan's book and are absolutely stunning. This foodie guy has brought a whole new community to our discussion. For people who are involved with medicine, the moment of truth was the Canadian Medical Association Journal front cover. This is the conservative voice of physicians across Canada. And they chose a number of articles summarizing psychedelic research and the current state of the psychedelic renaissance in terms of the research.
I'm going to start off my talk with a quote from Brené Brown. Owning our story can be hard, but not nearly as difficult as spending our lives running from it. Embracing our vulnerabilities is risky, but not nearly as dangerous as giving up on love and belonging and joy. The experiences that make us the most vulnerable. Only when we are brave enough to explore the darkness will we discover the infinite power of our light. Tonight, I will take you on a journey through the light and dark aspects of the psychedelic and psychotherapeutic work, incorporating the holistic, bio, psycho, social, spiritual perspective. My intention here is not to create further divide and fragmentation in this world. My intention is to speak my truth and help expand conscious awareness of the issues discussed in my talk. We have spoken frequently in our MDMA study about the trauma of veterans and first responders, and I am here to talk about the experiences of women. My message is not to shame, blame, ostracize, or criticize those who have harmed me or others, as that can keep us stuck in a cycle of victimhood and powerlessness. It is completely valid to be enraged at injustice and violation, and I have been in those dark places myself. However, I have a duty and a responsibility to share this message of healing, transformation, and growth for our community and our world. I am here to be authentic and vulnerable, just the way we ask our participants to be. This is about healing the rupture between men and women through the balancing out the universal energies rather than swinging the pendulum the other way, causing more anger, rage, hatred, and violence. We are all in need of the same thing, which is healing and love. The only way we can expand our perception and consciousness is through compassion, as everyone in some way can be perceived as a victim or survivor of trauma. I believe we are slowly starting to wake up to the revelation that we have all been wounded to various degrees, as the collective is waking up to the impact of the damage that we are all accountable for, the destruction of our environment and our home, Mother Earth. I will be sharing my personal trauma story publicly here for the first time today. You will be my witness. This is the story of transformation and transcendence, where scarcity turns to abundance, where hate moves into love, where fear transcends into connection, where avoidance leads into resolution, and where shame evolves into courage. I would like to introduce myself. My name is Joanna Simundic, and I am one of the MAPS therapists in the Phase 3 clinical research study. I'm also a participant based on my lived experience with trauma. I am a registered clinical social worker and a registered clinical counselor. I am also a survivor of complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I am recently married to a loving and devoted husband and have an ambitious and kind-hearted 21-year-old daughter in her final year of Simon Fraser University, majoring in biology. I have an undergraduate degree in psychology from York University and a master's of social work from Wilfrid Laurier University. I have been in private practice for 5 years now, and I specialize in the treatment of various trauma, including complex PTSD and trauma-related dissociation. I was trained to be a psychedelic psychotherapist with MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, as you may already know. We are in the process of Phase 3 clinical trials focusing on MDMA-Assisted psychotherapy. We are one phase away from making MDMA a legal medicine for psychotherapy purposes. We have seen amazing results in phase 2 of our study completed in 2016, with 2/3 of the participants no longer being diagnosable for PTSD post 1-year follow-up. I was blessed with the opportunity to have my own MDMA experience in April 2017 with 2 highly qualified and the most loving and empathic therapists I could have asked for. Marcela Otalora, principal investigator and research therapist for the Boulder, Colorado site, and her husband, Bruce Poulter, research therapist. Deep in my family through our DNA. The plant medicines taught me about my ancestors' history of intergenerational trauma through the World War II invasion and the genocide of Poland and its citizens. The official Polish government report on war damages prepared in 1947 put Poland's war debt at 6,028,000, 3 million ethnic Poles, and 3 million Jewish citizens of Poland at the hands of Nazi Germany. Approximately 50,000 Polish children were taken away from their families, transferred to German families to be raised due to their Aryan features. My ancestors lived through the Soviet occupation, where estimates of the number of Poles who died at the hands of the Soviets ranged from 350,000 to nearly 1 million. 100,000 women were estimated to be raped in the Soviet invasion. 320,000 deported to the work camps in Siberia, where starvation and torture ensued. 500,000 of Poles were imprisoned, mainly military, clergy, lawyers, doctors, and teachers. Approximately 90% of the casualties were male, leaving behind many widows and children. The Katyn massacre was a series of mass executions of Polish intelligence, officers and high-ranking members of society, carried out by the Soviet Union in 1940. Poles could not claim identity of their deceased family members found in the massive burial graves until much later, since this was a hidden crime. Poland was wiped off the map multiple times since the 17th century by surrounding nations and only looks the way it does since 1945. My homeland is still trying to heal from these extensive war crimes, as evidenced by a high rate of depression, anxiety, suicide, alcohol abuse, sexual and physical violence that's hidden within the family systems. These dysfunctional behaviors have become normalized within the Polish families, as we see today. As part of intergenerational trauma, the journey of suffering followed us all the way to Canada. My family of origin suffered greatly through the immigration process in 1991, as we escaped socialist Poland, where poverty pervaded and we lived off food stamps. In Canada, my parents had to work 3 jobs each just to put food on the table for us, barely seeing my 2 little sisters and I. As we grew up, this inevitable separation caused a great deal of tension in our household. Later, during our adolescent years, we left behind our family, our culture, our language, and our roots to start a new life in Canada. My parents suffered significantly through this process, as their marriage was extensively strained. Our development, my sisters and I, was stunted, and our family broken apart. The P for post in my PTSD has never been post for me until my early 30s. It's always just moved from one post to the other. I've encountered various forms of trauma experiences within my lifetime. Abandonment by my biological father. Sexual abuse in childhood from ages 3 to 6 at the hands of an adult male relative, and then at age 8 at the hands of an adult male family friend. Extensive physical, psychological, and emotional abuse during my most formative years in childhood. Near drowning as a child at age 8 that resulted in a near-death experience. Witnessing an attempted assault on my stepfather at age 10. Living in poverty for most of my childhood in Poland during the communist and socialist times in the early 80s. Tragic and violent death of my daughter's father, my first love. Sexual assault at the hands of my former partner and a male stranger. Intimate partner violence in 2 long-term relationships. Severe sexual harassment as an adolescent and young woman at the hands of men, including a landlord, a property manager, and a work supervisor, trying to request sex as an exchange for favors. Intense psychological bullying in the workplace at my lowest points in life. Vicarious trauma of witnessing and emotionally supporting women in my family that were violently assaulted at the hands of men. Vicarious trauma from watching people be controlled and oppressed by the mental health system, especially in our current psychiatric units and emergency departments, through the archaic practices of not operating through a trauma-informed practice. These are not just items on a list that I'm sharing with you. These were my earlier life experiences. I have spent most of my life dissociated and fragmented, living in an altered state of numbness and disconnection, sprinkled with extreme fear and anxiety, with a dash of unpredictable states of depression, only now finding the breadcrumbs left behind of what has really happened. Based on my extensive trauma history, I could have easily gained the following labels or diagnoses from a psychiatrist. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, complex PTSD, not adopted by a current DSM, the Diagnostic Statistics Manual, used by physicians to diagnose mental disorders. Dissociative disorder, not otherwise specified. Generalized anxiety disorder with depressive episodes. Traits of borderline personality disorder, which up to recently was seen as a lifelong disorder. Substance use disorder for various drugs and alcohol that I would use to soothe and numb myself in my 20s. When we cannot cope, we turn to addiction as an escape, as shown through Gabor Mate's work. Our world provides a wide menu full of options for us to suppress our pain, whether it is drugs and alcohol, sex, relationships, Netflix, sugar, internet, pornography, food, working out, being a workaholic, shopping, gaming, gambling, and the list goes on and on. My addiction was to run away from the pain of my trauma by submerging myself in studies, work, and accomplishments, and getting as many degrees, designations, trainings, and certifications under my belt. Through this process, I was able to avoid thinking about my past, as I had a long list of tasks to get through. What became interesting over time was that I was finding intuitive ways to channel my pain and suffering, and later transform it through my assistance of others and helping them change their lives. The more work I did on myself, the more capacity I had to hold space for others as they found their way through the darkness of their trauma. I came to realize my path in my late 20s when I came to understand why I chose psychology and social work as my fields of studies. It's as though I was guided on this path by an inner knowing that was always there with me, my inner healer. My other addiction was continuously being in relationships to avoid the feelings of loneliness and despair. I would submerge myself in these connections, one after the other, many of which were abusive, unhealthy, neglectful, harmful, and damaging to my sense of self-worth as I reenacted my abusive childhood in these relationships, my place of familiarity and, strangely enough, comfort. It was better to be in relationship than to be alone and having to face the suffering that I was carrying and was trying hard to suppress and avoid. I cannot say it worked well since I was most triggered in my relationships and would continuously be re-victimized, adding more onto my already full plate of pain. I was told time heals. However, in my experience, time does not heal. Time suppresses. I have had many dark nights of the soul where I would experience deep pain and suffering. My nervous system could not take on any more trauma. The trauma imprint got locked in my body and started manifesting as severe anxiety with episodes of deep depression due to the emotional dysregulation, with alternating experiences of fight, flight, freeze, submit, and dissociation. The doctors I saw just wanted to medicate my pain and suppress it even further. Drugs and alcohol worked temporarily, and most times made the pain worse, especially during the withdrawal period. I would medicate myself with sleeping aids since I could not fall or stay asleep throughout the night. Various therapists offer superficial Band-Aid solutions and send me on my way to do cognitive homework, which only made my brain loop in circles without getting in touch with the trauma material at all. That's when I came to realize it was really up to me. I started getting interested in trauma work when I started my first official job at a shelter for women fleeing abuse. These women and children were escaping from abusive situations because they were no longer safe to be at home. They came to this place with other women in the community. Where can we feel physically and emotionally safe as women? In Toronto, I participated in Take Back the Night events, where women took to the streets reclaiming the night, as when darkness falls, women's safety gets compromised. If it's not men we know, it's men we don't know. When I was a student at York University, there was a man assaulting Asian women on campus by following them at night and raped over 10 women within a span of a year. This actual story is old. However, the theme has remained the same, just with different characters in different locations. These women's experiences became imprinted on my brain in my early 20s, almost challenging to believe that they exist in today's modern world. As women shared about their abuse stories, it started to sink in that they were representations of my own experience of my then relationship. And then it slowly dawned on me that I might be in an abusive relationship. It was a wake-up call. I was shocked and surprised to see how normalized the behavior of abuse was for me, that it took me to work in an abused women's shelter to finally see it in myself. Breaking through the illusion was one of the first major steps in healing. Recognizing that this type of treatment was actually harmful, that somehow this was not the norm, that this was not the way I deserved to be treated, that it was not okay when my partner would call me names, yell at me, push me and shove me, intimidate me, neglect my emotional needs, belittle me. My abusive relationship went on for several years. This was one of the hardest relationships to leave. He was also someone with an extensive trauma history, reenacting his abuse story with me and taking out his pain on me. This partner resembled my stepfather in the way he treated my mother. It was what I was used to. Every time I tried to leave the relationship with my ex, there was a part of me that couldn't deal with the loss. I initially thought it was because my first love, the father of my daughter, was murdered violently. And I thought that was what it was related to. Maybe I'm scared of loss. Maybe I'm scared of being alone, because I lost him so tragically and suddenly, and that it was so painful. I later learned that this was not the original trauma, that the wounding goes way back to childhood. The sexual, the physical, the emotional, the psychological abuse. The stuff that I've suppressed and dissociated from, because how could I ever come to terms with the reality that my family have harmed me? It became part of my early imprint, my core belief that I was bad, and that I did not matter. I knew deep inside that it did not feel good. However, these core beliefs were ingrained in our family as legacy burdens passed down from one generation to the next. It was okay to treat each other like that, so I thought. Growing up, I intuitively knew that I did not belong in my family, but there was something different about me. I was told that I was just too sensitive and to get over it. Instead, I had to resort to these extreme roles of deep rage, fear, shame, and collapse. But that was how we survived in our household. I could not let my guard down. I could not just be kind. I had to be watchful and vigilant, anticipating the next conflict, the next triggered situation that would unravel a domino chain reaction with multiple dysregulated nervous systems living under one roof without any external support. Our bottom-up reactions of the polyvagal system would completely hijack our thinking cognitive brains and resort to firing off instinctual responses of our reptilian brains, our most primitive part of our brain responsible for our survival. Then there was the emotional flooding of the limbic brain, also known as our emotional brain. The war zone would start off within our own household, where all safety went out the window. The terror scene would get extreme with only a moment's notice, as yelling, explosive anger, loud noises, shaming, blaming, name-calling, and sometimes when we get too much, there would be throwing or hitting or something of that nature. When we were children, we were powerless to stop the abuse because we couldn't fight back or run away with our little bodies. We were fully reliant on our parents for our survival. Instead, we would dissociate and disconnect from our bodies as our only escape when there is no escape, as Sandra Paulson has shared in her work. When we got to adolescence, our bodies got stronger, so we found ways to fight back, to stand up for ourselves, to run away from home, to sometimes even more unsafe environments. This type of early experience was mirrored in my parents' childhood, except that their situations were severely worse than ours. They were just numb after repeated unhealed trauma, completely dissociated and fragmented. They were reenacting their own childhood histories with us as the trauma story lives on intergenerationally through the family dynamics of abuse. My parents believed that they were teaching us a lesson, discipline like their parents have taught them. However, we were just frightened children with no conscious awareness of what we were being punished for, but just deeply internalizing that we were bad, leading to intense shame, fear, and an ingrained sense of worthlessness. This is the implicit procedural memory that remains in the body while the conscious mind tries to forget in order to keep going on with life. I entered into my undergraduate psychology program at the age of 18 after speeding through high school, ready to take on the world. I chose psychology because it was the one program that could help me find the best solutions on how I can help my family in overcoming their pain and suffering. I was asked by my mother to figure out what is happening to our family when she felt helpless and overwhelmed, which was most of the time. I helped her co-parent my 2 younger sisters starting at an early age of 7. I bore the responsibility of being the eldest, of healing my entire family on my shoulders. I played the caretaker and the fixer roles in my family of origin. Since then, I became trauma-obsessed, reading huge volumes of academic books, attending numerous trainings on the topic, listening to about every podcast I could find, participating in various workshops, attending every type of conference related to healing trauma. This extensive immersion has assisted me greatly in the work that I do today, and for that, I am thankful. I recognized early on that getting lost in our current mental health system, being pathologized for my pain, as a result of traumatic events that were out of my control, was pointless. I did not need further blame for my symptoms. I've been criticized and shamed for my feelings all my childhood. I have tried the SSRI antidepressant cocktail a few times, and it helped temporarily to mask my symptoms. However, I came to realize that suppressing my pain was not the answer for me. I understood that engaging with our current mental health treatment did not help me to find the empowerment that I needed to get through this ordeal. The word disorder can appear so harsh for something that wasn't my fault. My later work experience in the mental health and addictions field helped me realize that I made the right choice. I could not find any ounce of healing within the structure designed to help people deal with mental health issues. Before I say more, I had the privilege in meeting and working with many gems of caring colleagues that genuinely tried to help. However, most of my experiences within the mental health system consisted of witnessing oppressive tendencies of power and control dynamics, taking away people's sense of agency because the experts believe they know what's best. Yet the experts don't really listen to the stories of the past, to the dissociated voices in people's heads, to the pain and suffering held in our bodies. The focus is on symptom management by locating the right medication to further suppress the pain that just continues to linger in the implicit memories of the body, waiting for the next big trigger to emerge. Through my extensive work history in the mental health and addiction field over the last 13 years, I have discovered that just managing symptoms seems like a hopeless ordeal. It leaves us dependent on a system that is broken. It distracts us from the potential to actually heal and let the past become the past and live fully in the present. What I discovered was that true healing is in facing our past, looking at our core issues, finding the courage to face ourselves after decades of avoiding, numbing, and hiding from our pain. We can find long-term relief and transformation, as well as find hope in the potential of a brighter future, full of vitality and connection. What is healing? What does that entail? In my perspective, through my work with trauma survivors, it consists of a safe space, a safe container, with the right set and setting, where you can be held in however way you show up, all the different parts of self, whether it's the raging part that wants to protect any leftover sense of integrity and boundaries. Maybe it's the panic, fearful part of the self that wants to avoid any confrontation or any reminder of the past. Maybe it's the part of the self that is completely frozen and paralyzed, frozen in time of the trauma experience, frozen due to the shock and horror of it. Maybe it's the part of the self that is wanting to attach, wanting to connect, wanting to cry for help, wanting to reach out its arms for support. Fragmentation of the self is an inevitable result of developmental and relational trauma during the most formative years of our lives, when we break off into parts of self, compartmentalizing the pieces of the unbearable experiences of hurt, betrayal, wounding, neglect, abuse and punishment, and abandonment. This inner separation, where the mind hides from itself, can persist into our adult lives, shielding us from the magnitude of the damage caused by the past, so that we can keep going on with life and slowly pick up the pieces to rediscover ourselves all over again when we feel safe to do so. For healing to happen, we as therapists need to create the safety in the space for these parts of the self to emerge from the subconscious, for us to hold without judgment, with complete openness and love for every part of the self. Because when we stop identifying with parts of our personality, also known as ego states, we tap into something much greater, our true essence of who we are. At the core, we are whole and perfect. When we connect to this essence of our true self, we tap into our inner healer. Through this MDMA-assisted psychotherapy process, we can get in touch with our inner healer in a much clearer way. Our inner guide who has been there all along, leaving breadcrumbs for us to find our way to wholesomeness. The MDMA-assisted psychotherapy process is about honoring the participants in their healing journey and creating an ideal space for the inner healer to emerge and guide us into whatever is needed in that moment. Holding space, which is the process of witnessing and validating someone else's emotional state while simultaneously being present to our own. Assisting the participant in getting comfortable with their inner guidance coming through them. Holding the participant's hand or using loving and appropriate touch. Being present and actively listening to the needs of the participant. Helping them attentively and mindfully listen with their whole body as to what needs to happen next. Assisting in moving energy of the old stored up body memories through various breath work or body work as initiated by the participant, to discharge or release the tensions trapped within the body, guiding the participant in reviewing former memories of the traumatic experience and creating a new narrative of safety and resolution. We are guides, allies, supporters, and helpers in this process. We are not the experts. We leave our tools at the door. We show up without any agenda, with a beginner's mind, to be in the present moment mindfully. We trust the process and the work of the inner healer, with the MDMA supporting the opening of the heart, the reduction of fear, and the ability to witness in the present moment. That is our role in this space. I am the therapist, and I am the participant. We are playing these roles in this experience, yet we are all influenced by the healing taking place. Even though I sit in the chair of the therapist in the research room, I am affected by the accelerated process of change that I bear witness to. The healing that extends past the participant as they go out into the world and interact with their immediate group of supports, whether it's their partners, loved ones, friends, or colleagues at work. Through their transformation, they then impact the other. This process requires a lot of courage and strength, as it is not an easy task to undertake. It requires deep work in facing our past and ourselves. Our participants are extremely courageous beings, willing to take on this significant journey in order to find healing, liberation from their suffering, and peace. PTSD and complex trauma can look very different to mainstream society, as people assume that PTSD only happens to others, not ourselves. Yet we are all affected by trauma in one way or another. My definition of trauma is an emotional wound or shock that causes substantial, sometimes lasting damage to emotional and psychological development. The impact of trauma also shows up in the physical manifestation of our bodies, brain, and nervous system. Trauma comes in the form of spiritual emergency, as coined by Christina and Stan Groff, where we are faced with our own mortality and exposed to the darkest faces of humanity and can never be the same again. Therefore, according to Peter Levine, trauma is not so much the event of what happened, but rather the lasting impact and impression that those events have left behind. Trauma has always been part of our human experience and has been around as long as humanity has lived on this planet. However, we call it different names throughout history, and now we call it PTSD. In essence, PTSD does not fully capture the complexity of developmental and relational trauma in childhood during our most formative years of our social, physical, emotional, and psychological development. Judith Herman proposed the concept of complex PTSD as a diagnostic label for the DSM in the 1980s, which has not been adopted despite the valid arguments from trauma therapists and other helping professionals to educate and incorporate the knowledge into the psychiatric field that dominates the current mental health and addiction system. Trauma lives on long after the experience, and it manifests itself in flashbacks, relieving images of the past event as though it is happening right now. Dreams or nightmares of unresolved themes of the trauma experience emerging from our subconscious mind. Uncomfortable or painful body sensations. Avoidance of reminders of the past. Chronic pain. ADHD symptoms as shown by Gabor Mate. Our need to suppress pain through addiction or eating disorders. Emotional triggers that could appear at any moment. Intrusive thoughts of the past. Overwhelming emotional states. Depression and anxiety as we recycle old information in our default mode network of our brains. Insomnia due to the fear of being vulnerable and falling asleep. Suicide as the only way out of pain. Engaging in self-harm behaviors to numb or punish ourselves. It can also show up as critical voices in our heads, or sabotaging parts of our personality, urging us to engage in harmful behaviors or end their life to stop the pain. Our Western society has some of the highest and rapidly increasing rates of depression, anxiety, addiction, suicide, self-harm, and eating disorders. Some of the most accomplished people are also struggling with ghosts in their closet. They come out to haunt them when they are alone with their thoughts. They are not exempt. We are just really good at pretending, at putting on a facade or mask, of suppressing our pain and suffering to keep going on with life. However, we forget our inner children as they continue to cry inside, trapped in trauma time, experiencing ongoing fear and terror, reliving experiences of helplessness and powerlessness. We only get snippets of this internal experience when we get triggered in our day-to-day reality, sometimes not knowing why we feel depressed or anxious. There are times when there are no words in our sessions. Trauma can affect the Broca's area in our brain, impacting our ability to speak. And we are rendered speechless, as Bessel van der Kolk would say. How do we use language in a world where there are no words? We connect to the implicit body memories of the past by creating space for anything to emerge. The shock impact of the trauma, the suppressed preparatory movements of the body, the layers of abuse and neglect, the secrecy of shame. What does work with MDMA-assisted psychotherapy look like? In my experience as a trauma survivor and a trauma therapist, I have the privileged perspective to see both sides of the coin. I can move into the participants' experience of their trauma and walk alongside of them, as difficult and as dark as it gets. I have the tool of being able to reference my own lived experience as a helpful navigational map through difficult terrain. I also recognize it's my map, and that despite many similarities with others' experiences, it is still my personal lens. It is essential in holding energetic boundaries to know where our story ends and theirs begin. It's about holding participants in a skillful way to allow them to process their trauma experience while keeping them safe and connected without taking them out of their inner experience by soothing or easing their pain. How do we connect to the medicine of love when we as the therapists are not partaking in the medicine? MDMA is all about love and connection. We need to meet the person where they are at, and that requires full openness and love, compassion, and deeper wisdom. How do we align with the participants in this non-ordinary state of consciousness? We need to show up as ourselves. In order to connect to this high frequency of love, we need to open up our hearts to the participants with deep appreciation and adoration for this lovely human being who is willing to be vulnerable with us in this way. In my perspective, the MDMA works for everyone in the room, and I feel that for me specifically, it opens up my heart and allows me to interact with the participants' electromagnetic energy of their heart, for connection to unfold through our mirror neurons. The amygdala in our emotional limbic brain can relax in order to stop firing off at its instinctual responses of threat, as the person recalls aspects of their trauma experience. Through this attunement, the participant can tap into the social engagement part of their brain, as indicated by Stephen Porges' work, as we interact feeling connected, present, and supported, while our neurons are engaged our attachment emotional circuits, deepening the connection through the oxytocin in the MDMA. We become one. It's an energetic attunement of the mind, body, and spirit that allows for the safety and trust to emerge. What does it mean to be a psychedelic psychotherapist? It is about loving our participants in all their parts. It's about doing our own healing work and owning our shadows and our triggers so that we can be the loving presence for the participants. As a psychedelic psychotherapist, it requires our own deep personal journeys into healing, meditation, and yoga practice to connect with the breath and the body. Doing our own psychological therapy work to release our past triggers. Being vulnerable as therapists and opening up our hearts to someone who is initially a complete stranger as we transition into a deep, lasting bond. Recognizing how much the courage the participant taps into to undergo this process in order to become vulnerable, maybe for the first time in their life. Having complete trust with your co-therapy partner, where your co-therapist fully has your back. Having a solid relational foundation, where the therapist can become the corrective mother and father experience for this participant. Being comfortable with strong projections, where participants shift from idolizing us and later perceiving us as their perpetrator. It takes a lot for us as psychedelic psychotherapists to be able to hold that kind of energy, to hold space for this type of encounter, and not be triggered. It requires doing our own work so that we do not harm or re-traumatize the individuals during this fragile situation. We give a new experience for the brain and body to override the old programs and release the trauma energy from the body. We allow the parts of the self to show up and play out their story of the past in front of us. Our need for attachment is very strong. There's always a part of us that wants to connect, but maybe at other times it connected to caregivers that were frightening or frightened, or in other cases harmful and dangerous individuals. The psyche splits into parts of self, compartmentalizing the experience, and dissociation occurs. Parts polarize with each other, where one part has a strong need to attach, while the other part becomes extremely fearful and afraid, while another part may resort to defend itself against perceived harm using anger or rage as a way of protecting itself from the very connection it longs for. This healing process is about returning to self-love, self-compassion, and self-worth, rediscovering ourselves. Behind the layers of our pain is our inner healer, always willing to help and show us that we are perfect underneath it all. We are whole and undamaged. When we give to ourselves in this compassionate, caring, calm, connected, and courageous way that Richard Schwartz has shown, we can create healthy attachments with our parts despite our earlier histories. Finding love for ourselves has the potential to not only heal ourselves, but the people around us and in the larger picture, our communities and our world. We have a chance to rewrite the old conditioning, to reconsolidate our neural networks into a new corrective experience of love for the other and love for ourselves. If we are able to create a secure base for the participants within our therapeutic relationship, then the participants are able to establish a safe haven for themselves, to reclaim their lost aspects of themselves, as Janina Fisher's work has shown us. That despite insecure attachments earlier in life, we can create a safe and stable relationship with ourselves through a healthy attachment with our fragmented parts of self, despite never having had the model for a stable connection. This is called earned secure attachment, as coined in the field of trauma and attachment research. We can become the parents for all our inner children and help parts depolarize from each other, releasing any internal conflict and finding balance within. Let's take some time to talk about the shadow of this work for a bit. It really requires a talk of its own. The shadow, as coined by Carl Jung, refers to the unconscious aspects of the personality, which the conscious ego does not identify in itself. When we don't own our shadow, our unconscious impulses, past pain, or unhealed trauma reenactments play themselves out in our present reality, whether we are consciously aware of it or not. Within our larger psychedelic community, people have been harmed at the hands of various practitioners doing psychedelic medicine work due to the practitioners' blind spots, their inability to see their own shadow at work. Many of the individuals impacted have been women at the hands of men, where women are assaulted or violated during their most vulnerable states of mind. We need to talk about these ethical issues in order to bring the highest integrity into this important and sensitive work. We need to be aware of our own energetic boundaries at all times in order to avoid any harm. We need to stop blaming the victims, the vulnerable ones, and hold the right people responsible. Again, it's not about blame or shame, but rather accountability, ethics, and integrity. It's about creating a container big enough to catch even those who have transgressed in their actions, to offer them a safe space with support in learning from their mistakes. Something for our Vancouver community to ponder on and create more discussions on this sensitive topic. This healing work is about empowerment, as we emerge from seeing ourselves as victim and the other as perpetrator, and reclaim our own power without the need to hurt the other or take away their power because we are hurting. As the saying goes, hurt people hurt people. I have also hurt and betrayed others in the depths of my pain. I can own that now and consciously choose to put an end to it and practice compassion. My guiding principle has shifted from the wounded healer archetype through my 30 years of lived experience with trauma to now the healer archetype in my journey of assisting others in finding empowerment within themselves. In order for me to embody the healer aspect, I needed to find myself first so that I could guide others in how to achieve that for themselves. I heard a saying recently that really resonated with me. A healer is not someone that you go to for healing. A healer is someone that triggers within you your own ability to heal yourself. In my work with MAPS and in my private practice work, I help facilitate a process by setting up the readiness and safety for others to find their innate ability to heal. My role is to carry the torch of light for others as they find their way through the dark passages of their own mind and body. I am able to sit in the room with extreme traumatic material and invite the release of the past within the therapeutic container, because from my lived and professional experience, it will be okay. Things will get better, and there is hope. My healing is their healing. Their healing is my healing, as many Indigenous healers say. As I often say to my team and the participants, as well as any interested individual, the medicine makes us all work. It does not matter if we are the therapist or the participant. It helps us to open our hearts and it helps us to let go of what no longer serves us. My healing journey looked very different than being on psychiatric medication as a solution or just focusing on temporary coping strategies to manage my symptoms. Instead, it was about deeper healing work that consisted of meditation and mindfulness practice, in-depth EMDR and somatic body-based therapy, parts work, spiritual and intuitive work, shamanic journeying, music therapy, holotropic breathwork, journaling, through the attunement and connection with my loving, patient, and understanding husband, who naturally knew exactly how to fulfill my emotional needs and create safety within our relationship for me to heal. Growing up alongside my kind, compassionate, strong, and supportive daughter, who intuitively always had good advice for me and was always there for me through all my pain and suffering. Through the support of my daughter's family, who adopted me in when I needed them the most, so that I could finish my schooling while parenting my daughter. forgiveness and gratitude practice, journeying with plant medicines, MDMA-assisted psychotherapy with MAPS, and through my therapeutic work with my clients, as they have been my greatest teachers in this work. My inner healer tapped into the perseverance and determination I needed to begin the journey of healing myself. It started at age 27 when I discovered that I can manifest what I focus on and visualize. Where awareness goes, energy flows. Suddenly I found myself in a meditation course offered by a man who asked for no fees and offered up the space to bring healing energy into the world. I found myself very drawn to meditation within the spiritual context. This man was blowing our minds twice a week for 6 months. I had to take the course twice to really sink in what he was offering. This was the beginning of change. I was finally able to let go of my compulsive need to be in abusive relationships. I found a way to break the pattern of what always felt comfortable, but wasn't good for me. I eventually found my way into the arms of my devoted husband, who loves me and honors me each day. His family have also adopted me with open arms, and I've been blessed to have so much love in my life. It is possible to break these old patterns, these former imprints, when we change our core beliefs. Someone asked me during a conference, I did not know that MAPS takes on healthy volunteers. When I shared about my MDMA experience in Boulder, Colorado, I asked the individual, what does it mean to be healthy in today's world where so many of us are pretending that everything is okay while we are struggling inside? When I look around, I see that we are all impacted in one way or another, living in a society disempowered by greed, corruption, lust, and aggression, where the ego takes hold and protects itself at all costs. Just living in this world alone can bring about feelings of despair, hopelessness, powerlessness, and extreme fear. I asked the individual, do you think I'm someone you would consider as healthy after decades of traumatic experiences? He looked at me puzzled, since he made the common assumption people make that I was healthy in his eyes. I definitely feel healthier and wholesome than ever before in my life. However, the state of the world has me feeling blue sometimes. I shared about my MDMA experience in Boulder, Colorado through the generous support from MAPS. I sat across two of the most supportive and loving therapists, assisting me through my deep journey for 20 hours, with 8 hours on the medicine, as I shared my deepest secrets due to the felt safety in the room. I knew intuitively that I had another chance at healing and playing the important role, dual role of participant and MDMA psychotherapist and researcher. So what's really healthy and what's unhealthy? Lines are blurred when we are really honest with each other. Yet transformation is possible, and this powerful transformation is spiritual in nature. Trauma is one avenue to spiritual enlightenment. What have we learned in our MDMA studies and through our participants' experiences is that when we tap into our higher self, our true essence, our inner healer, we can become new and improved versions of ourselves. When we face ourselves, when we stop running and hiding and avoiding and numbing and disconnecting, and we face ourselves, then we come to realize that all the answers are within us. That we have everything we need right here, right now. I've had the privilege of meeting many healthy men in our community, doing their work, and my heart's open to what's possible in our society. We are all impacted by the unbalanced energies of the masculine and the feminine. I am speaking through you to all your inner parts, as these messages are important to sink in. As you take this in, please focus on your breath. It is time to heal Mother by doing our work. It is time to create emotional and physical safety for all women around all men. It is time for men to be conscious and accountable for misuse and abuse of power to help eradicate patriarchy as it has not served us well. It's time for women to face to heal in order to not perpetuate the hate and anger for all men, since many men are stepping up to the plate and upgrading the program of their past conditioning. It is time for men to teach fellow men about toxic masculinity, that it is okay to be vulnerable as men, and that we need to respect and honor our women. It is time for women to speak up when we feel uncomfortable or simply feel help with love and compassion. We all play a role in this rebalancing act as men tap into their feminine, compassionate, and vulnerable side, and for women to tap into their masculine power and agency, since we are made up of both. As I stand here before you, I am proud to say that I've healed my experience of complex trauma. I almost died at age 8, and I came back to life. I lost my mind at 15, cracked open through deep tragic loss, and I've healed. I gave birth at 16, not knowing how big of a responsibility that was yet, and I'm proud to be a mother. I hit my lowest point at age 24, as I became completely numb, and now it's safe to feel again. I broke my abusive relationship pattern at 32 and healed in relationship. I found myself again at 36 as my daughter walked me down the aisle to give me a way to marry my soulmate. I also found my community, my tribe here in Vancouver, and aligned with my life path, purpose, and mission. If these are all not extraordinary states of consciousness, then I'm not sure what to call them. These were my most pivotal moments in my transformation. I believe healing will be lifelong for all of us. It will also continue for me, and I welcome it. I've woken up from my dissociated sleep and lived life in the present moment as much as I can. I've transitioned into a secure attachment in my marriage after years of insecure connections. I have shifted my personality structure from being fragmented and dysfunctional to an adaptive and wholesome way of being in the world with the help of neuroplasticity and rewiring my old programs and replacing them with a sense of empowerment and vitality. I have positive relationships in my life and healthier boundaries. I can stand up for myself. I live a very peaceful life. I have financial freedom. I am free of my previous addictions. The only one I'm battling these days is sugar, and I'm slowly finding my way through it. I can take better care of myself. Most importantly, I love and honor myself. When we do our work, the universe delivers in such a beautiful and abundant way. After years of healing, I can honestly say that I love my family. I have found compassion and have come to understand that we all have been wounded and all have the potential to heal and live in the present. I am now in an empowered position to help them find their way, including the ancestors before me, through ancestral healing. I strongly believe in the power of our own healing by finding our own path of what works and letting go of what does not work anymore. Only you, as the individual, can know what is needed. You are the expert of your own experience, and everyone else is your psychic, your ally, your supporter. Empowerment is the key. What can we do to energies and come into harmony as we rebuild our society? Stand up for yourself when you feel uncomfortable around someone else's behavior, even if you appear as not nice, or fearing the rupture of a relationship, or some other block stopping you from speaking. Speak your truth with compassion and consideration for the other, rather than lashing out, to maximize on the opportunity to be heard, without the other shutting down or getting defensive. If you cannot find your voice, find support where others you trust can help you express yourself and assert your needs. healthy boundaries with the people in your life and discern what is yours versus theirs. Model healthy ways of being in relationship with the other for those who are still lost and finding their way back into balanced relationships. Do your work to open up your heart. Heal your past wounds. When you feel triggered by the other, that is your clue to what you still hold inside of you that needs your attention. Be responsible for your own safety and let others know when they have crossed the line. See the inner children in all of us to help us soften our hearts rather than pointing fingers of blame and shame onto the other. Give opportunities for women to lead in our society, as a dear male friend of mine suggested one time, as they are the mothers that can help find the way to healing, harmony, and balance. Give back to Mother Earth in any way you can, as without her, we cannot survive. My story is my medicine. I want to take the time to thank my lovely daughter Samantha, my loving husband Mike, my dear friends and family, Max, Rick Doblin, Michael and Annie Midhofer, Marcela Otalora and Bruce Poulter, Mark Hayden, Anne-Marie Armour, Trevor Miller, MAPS Canada and all the volunteers, all the generous donation providers, all the community supporters, the study participants, past and future, along with their families, the Vancouver MAPS team, and all of you today for generously providing your support and encouragement in making this treatment a possibility and being available to all.